Welcome to another exciting episode of the New England and New York Real Estate Journal podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. Let me tell you a little bit about our next guest. Our next guest is Berekk Blackwell, and he's the Chief Operating Officer of Zone Properties, a publicly traded strategic real estate development firm for emerging and highly regulated industries. Blackwell has extensive experience in the expansion of retail brands both domestically and internationally. His focus at Zone Properties is identifying cannabis real estate solutions for zoning challenges while mitigating risks for clients. I want to introduce you to Berekk Blackwell of Zone Properties. Good morning, Berekk.
Hey, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. And, right now with what's going on around the world with cannabis, this is very informative what you have to say. So tell me a little bit about what you are all about, what you do day to day in your company.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm the COO of Zoned Properties. We are a commercial real estate company based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. And we work in highly regulated industries. So right now, about 90% of our work is in the cannabis space. So some of the things that we do are around helping clients identify properties. There's a lot of complexity around zoning and where municipalities will allow these businesses to operate. So we assist clients in deciphering all of that information, strategizing around solid quality, compliant locations. We do a lot of brokerage work, advising property owners who want to position their property for sale or lease to the cannabis industry. And then we also have an investment division that we are deploying capital, buying properties, bringing them through entitlements, and working with operators that we know and trust, and leasing that back to the industry. So that's us. We work across the country. Although we're based in Arizona, we work in about just over 10 states now. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut being a huge focus of ours the last year, with the regulations coming online and the timeliness of the market. So.
And we've talked in the past, and we talked a little bit about the Connecticut market, which is just opening up,
right?
Which is a perfect time for when someone is interested in that market. They should contact you, because that's right at the beginning stages. Let's get things going. Let's get someone that knows how to get these things going in a market that's just turning into a cannabis, recreational use license.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's and just to touch on that, I mean, it's I think the big caveat is every state is completely different. The regulations change. There's a different landscape, even just crossing the border into a new state. Some states are limited license in that they cap the number of licenses that are going to be issued. Some are unlimited. Some do lotteries where you actually don't need real estate to apply. So Connecticut, for example, you could apply without real estate, and then they do a lottery. And if your name is pulled, then you have a certain amount of time to find real estate. So what you were just saying is, if somebody was just issued a license, a conditional license, now they have a shot clock on them to go and find property. And that's where we come in and help strategize around that. But New York, I know we're talking about New York today, is different, much different. So yeah, it's ever changing landscape, which is fun and exciting in the cannabis space.
Well, yeah, you're right. We're going to start talking about New York, and New York is right on the border, right, of turning licenses on.
Right.
Every state, before they start to do that, they try to establish a cannabis commission or commission that will make some of these new rules and regulations. And one of the rules and regulations that New York is starting with is is that they want to have it, open it up for everyone. I'm guessing, so anyone that is interested in being involved in the industry. But one of the things that I read is that they're going to focus on people that have been incarcerated for cannabis in the past and offer them licenses, or for their family members, so something on that.
Yeah.
That sounds a little
Yeah.
iffy, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll just caveat this too. I mean, things are changing really, really quickly in New York. Not changing, but they're evolving. So I'm gonna explain kind of what we know today, and also what we don't know, because there's a lot of I think just unanswered questions in terms of the way that the rules are panning out right now. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So New York is rolling out an adult use program. They've decided, so in the original, what they call the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, they designated that 50% of the licenses in total will end up going to what they call social equity applicants. So social equity applicants typically are ways that the state and regulatory bodies try to give back to people and communities that were most negatively impacted by the war on drugs or marijuana related offenses, things like that. And so what essentially they've done is the first 200 or so licenses, retail licenses specifically, will go to these social equity applicants. The qualifications right now, as far as I know, are that you had to have a marijuana related offense, and this is where it gets really interesting, and more than 2 years running a successful, quote unquote successful business. So that applicant pool becomes pretty small. I think that they will probably loosen that up, and there are other categories, but this initial round is going to go to these social equity applicants. And other states have done social equity programs in the past, and I don't think that there's been one that's hit the perfect home run and it's worked out perfect. But what's really interesting about New York is the Cannabis Control Board, which kind of governs the program. They've set up a fund, so a social equity cannabis investment fund is what it's called, $200 million. And essentially what they're trying to do is make it completely turnkey. So if you fit that mold as a social equity applicant, you would apply, and the state would hand you over a kind of a turnkey dispensary. So they've already done the site selection phase. I shouldn't say they've already done it, but that'd be the ideal situation, is that they would have the real estate, they would have it built out, they hand them the keys, and that operator is off to the races. There's a lot of issues, as you can imagine, with that kind of a plan. And so that's essentially where we're at now. Is there's a lot of back and forth. There's pages and pages of question and answer, people submitting clarification requests to the state about how this is going to work. From what I've been told, they're still honestly looking for qualifying real estate. And there's a ton of unanswered questions around, what does the rent structure look like, for example, for a social equity applicant that ends up, taking one of these pre-found locations. So essentially, in to distill that into like one sentence, the state is essentially subsidizing the pre-opening process for a social equity applicant. And we're still working through a lot of the details there, but that's what's happening, and that's unique. Haven't seen that in any other state.
Well, I mean, I call that social entitlement. more than anything else. It puzzled me to hear something like that when you think about someone that was, even though it might not have been right that they were selling marijuana in the 1980s illegally, or growing it illegally, it was illegal. They were running a business that was not legal, and they were
Right.
a criminal.
Exactly.
And now you bring them in and you say, okay, now we want to make it legal for you because we arrested you for doing an illegal act. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. But so New York has always been a kind of a different animal, even with the medical, because I know they had a lot of issues with the medical licenses that they issued years ago, because a lot of those people that own those dispensaries weren't allowed to do a lot of things. So you couldn't have signage on the building. You couldn't.
Right.
It made it very difficult.
Yeah.
So I don't know how is this going to change their thinking? Well, obviously it is changing somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the direct comparison that I can make to New York and the program that's rolling out is, and it's not, we haven't really seen how it's going to turn out, but New Jersey's similar in a lot of ways, just generally speaking, in terms of going from a limited license medical program. So, a low number of licenses controlled by, some MSOs, larger operators, to more of an unlimited open program with a lot of social equity focus. And like I said, that's happening in New Jersey, and they're about a year ahead, maybe a year and a half ahead of where New York is today. And yeah, you start to see like more loosening up of the restrictions around, things like that, like things like signage, marketing practices, things like that, where it becomes more of a true kind of adult use recreational landscape. And so I think it helps the industry. I think at the end of the day, I mean, as a business owner, people want to be able to present themselves in their own way, have their own, type of flair. Not that that might not be the case with social equity, location specifically, because they're kind of pre-built out. But all in all, having the ability to be able to market to a specific customer base and things like that is important. But what that does is it basically pushes the issues down from the state to the localities. So, now, similar to other markets where they're kind of opening it up to more broad license holders, now the cities have decisions to make, right? What's going to be in their ordinance as it relates to cannabis businesses? What are they going to allow? What are they going to not allow? Are they going to opt into the program is the first question. And there's been plenty of opt-outs in New York, for sure. So that's another thing to consider. But now these municipalities are wrestling with an issue that previously they had spent very little time on. So that's also a big piece of cannabis real estate, is really understanding the local landscape and how your local officials are thinking about the problems.
So let's talk about the real estate, because New York is the real estate in New York can go from an area where there's a lot of great space that's very expensive in heavily populated areas, and then you can go to an area like in upstate New York, parts of Long Island, that you have inexpensive space, and it might be in like family residential areas, so
Yeah.
so I can't imagine that you're not going to have a lot of cities and towns that they're going to be against opening up, I'm sure, and like
Right.
everywhere. And then you have places like the city. You might have some people that aren't really a fan of having it in their area of the city.
Right.
So is there a lot of pushback in a lot of different cities and towns?
Yeah, there normally is. So so typically, a city will go through a full process. They'll have a hearing. They'll do it publicly, and you never really know what's going to happen, right? I think you can do all the research you want in terms of voter data. You can poll people, but you don't know what's going to happen until the city starts to have those open discussions. We've seen everything from just outright kind of uproar from citizens in their like small neighborhoods saying that they don't want this to be pushed forward. But once they do make a decision whether they opt out or opt in, it does have significant impact. If they opt out, they're in a lot of ways potentially missing at least the initial wave of license winners, because there's a huge rush in the beginning, right? Like I said, 200 plus applicants in probably the first 12 to 18 months that are going to be opening businesses across New York. If you opt out, you're going to push those operators into other parts of the state. So there's that. If you opt in, you obviously have you have to make sure you do it correctly, and you build that into your ordinance and your code the right way so that you affect the community in a positive way, not a negative way. So yeah, we've seen it all. I think generally speaking, in some of those maybe smaller towns, it's more prevalent of an issue, just given that there's more of a real kind of tight-knit community, and people tend to know all the business owners and things like that. But it's definitely still an issue in the likes of a big city.
Yeah, no, I talked with a couple of people when they first announced that they were going to make it legal to operate a adult use dispensaries and an operation like that. And there were a lot of people that contacted me afterwards wanting to know, how do I apply? How do I get how do I get on board for this? There was a guy that was a dry cleaner, he had a dry cleaning business.
Yeah.
It was everyone, all walks of life, interested in jumping on board, thinking that, oh, this is just like a retail business. I'll just get in at the beginning. And it's not that simple. I know I've been around a lot of operators. It's not an easy business to regulate, and it's very complicated, as a matter of fact. But if someone like that comes to you, how do you deal with that? Do you give them that kind of training, or give them the advice like, don't bother, don't try it?
We don't give kind of general business consulting. We do, like, we will gladly explain the complexity, is probably the best way to put it. So we'll lay out. It's hard enough running any business, right? Let alone one with as much red tape as this. So I think the best way to put it is having partners that you can bring to the table. We obviously, with our decade of experience, have a Rolodex of vendors and partners that know cannabis, know how complex it is. Anybody that says, like, some of these, white knight entrepreneurs that are kind of like, I'll do it myself, I'm going to do everything myself. Like, it's almost impossible in cannabis to do everything yourself. So everything from even just identifying your first location, to how to track inventory, your state level reporting, your local level reporting, to stay compliant, and keep your license, it's extremely complex. So like I said, we don't do that kind of consulting, but we do have conversations like that almost every day, definitely every week.
So you've been in the New York market for a little bit of now, so now you get the New York, now you have New Jersey, and you have Connecticut coming on board, and I think Rhode Island as well, and
Yep.
God knows who else, and you're all over the country. So there's a lot of markets that this is all emerging.
Yep.
Massachusetts, we know it started, they started the process, and it took about 3 years or something like 3 years before they started issuing licenses.
Yep.
So New York is about at that point. Well, no, they're about 2 years into it. So their licenses should be coming out now. Have they issued any licenses?
They've started to issue cultivation licenses. They're called conditional cultivation licenses, and they've issued the first round to existing hemp farmers. So if you had a hemp farming license from the Department of Ag, you'd be able to apply for that license. And so those have been issued, and I think they're still going through some of the final processes to start to grow. If not, they've already started. The application window for dispensary licenses actually opens up a couple days from now, August 25th. So yeah, we're kind of right at the cusp of the process starting, and applications going in, which makes it even more interesting that we have all these unanswered questions around the details of the process. So it'll be interesting to watch how it all unfolds, but we're right there at the beginning, so it's exciting, and I think everyone's ready for it. But it'll take some time for it to roll out.
So now your job comes into play with finding locations. Now, I know you told me in the past that you find some locations and you purchase them before the licenses are even issued, because those are the go-to areas. So have you started with that operation already? Or is
We've done a lot.
Top secret?
No. Yeah, we've done a lot of research. We do a ton of analysis on at first, looking at the entire state, right? So where are the opt-out hubs? We do research on whether or not we think those opt-outs are going to opt in at some point in the future, because those can potentially be very good opportunities from a real estate perspective. And kind of lay the landscape out. But what's happened in New York, and I think it's probably similar to other real estate developers, other property owners, we've been wrestling with the initial social equity process, in that there's been conflicting information coming out. So like I said, the state essentially was going out and identifying properties themselves, and working out a deal with the property owner, either acquiring it or structuring a lease, and then they were going to pass that to the operator directly. So we were really unsure, and honestly still are, whether or not, if we found a property ourselves and brought it to the table and we knew it was compliant, it met local regulations, passed ordinance, all that stuff, if we could submit a location ourselves to DASNY, which is the New York authority that's running the program, whether we could do that or not. And that is still an unanswered question. I think there's been some again, conflicting information over the last couple weeks that leaves that question unanswered. But typically it would be the process where we would start to go all in, acquiring or buying properties, and positioning them for an operator to come in and build their business. But we haven't made that full leap yet, just given the level of uncertainty we're dealing with. So.
Now, if someone is smart and they're getting into this industry, they probably would want to contact you, because if they don't, and I know people that have started on their own and try to find locations, there's a lot of time they spent, and waste because they look at properties that eventually find out it's not going to fly. It won't go.
Yeah.
Where you save them all that time and money. So in the long run, it's probably a good solution to contact a company like Zone Properties, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something we do every day, right? So like for somebody to start from scratch, I mean, even if they have a little bit of real estate experience, or if they're a broker or an agent, doing your first cannabis real estate deal is extremely difficult, and you have to have a lot of grit. Like I said, every municipality or city has their own zoning map, their own zoning system. So even just identifying we call them green zones where properties can locate. If you're looking at a few different cities, that's a lot of work. But then you get into, okay, well, how far do I need to be from a church, a school, a daycare, other sensitive uses? And now you're whittling down that potential property list. And you may run into the situation where there are no compliant properties in that city, so you have to move on. So it takes a real team. We have a full research team. We've got mapping, mapping capabilities that just operators don't have typically. So all that, and then you get to the point where like where would a successful business be able to survive looking at that list of properties. So you deal with the same kind of traditional real estate decisions, but you have to get to the point where where you can even start to look first. So yeah, we do it all day long. We love it. It's definitely something that we're excited about, and happy to assist, even have consultations with operators or even property owners for that matter, whenever needed.
Yeah, it's funny, when you said real estate brokers, that triggered a thought in my head, because at the beginning stages, there was almost every commercial real estate broker that was interested. Oh, I want to sell the properties to these growers and dispensary owners, all of the people in the business, because they're looking, oh, now this is like a constant flow of new customers coming in. So they had no clue what they were looking at as far as brokers. They just know real estate. And that was an issue, because they were showing spaces and they were going through all the whole process with people that were looking at space or looking for space. And the bottom line is they go to the appeals boards of the cities and towns, and they find out at the end of all of that, well, no, you can't have a dispensary here, or you can't have a grow facility here. So you wasted all that time, on that property.
Exactly.
And the same thing is with property owners, because all of them say, oh, I got an empty building. I know I'm going to get all the growers that are going to want to be in this building. All the dispensaries are going to want to be in here, and find out they can't have one in there. So you have to definitely know the ins and outs of the business and what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you find, as a broker, even if you find a site that ends up meeting all those criteria, you pass through zoning, all that stuff. The deal is typically contingent on that operator winning a state license and also getting their local license. That process could take 9 months. So I think sometimes you get brokers that do, dive in head first, and they spend 6 months looking for properties. They find one finally, and then they realize, oh wait, now I'm not going to get paid for another 6 months. So it's a lengthy process. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. So, but again, it's something that we've kind of carved out, and we like playing in the niche, and like we're excited about it. So
now, another thing that used to happen, and I'm not sure if it still goes on, and you probably run into this more than me, is that there are a lot of what they call consulting firms. and they will agree to find you space and help with the zoning and all that. But they don't really, that's not really their specialty. Their specialty is like charging hourly for what their thoughts of the day, more or less. Do you I don't know if there's still, because I remember there was a ton of them when the licenses were just about to start coming out in Massachusetts. Do you see a lot of those guys out there still? Because I don't hear as much about them.
They're definitely out there. And I will say this, I mean, given the amount of red tape around, well, not even that. So the licensing process, just getting an application done and submitted, a consultant is very valuable. Somebody who's been there, done that, and understands, how hard it is, and can assist an operator to kind of decipher that information. Like I said, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of there's a lack of clarity around some of the language, and so having a gut instinct and having a consultant at the table that can at least decipher what they think it says is important. With that said, most of them will stay in their lane and understand, if they've been around the industry at all, they understand how hard real estate is and the need for somebody that does it specifically, and is a real estate professional, if you will. Surely there are consultants out there that say they do it, and unfortunately, what happens a lot of times, and this goes back to our broker conversation, but brokers and consultants, or operators for that matter, they will end up latching on to a site that's being advertised as cannabis compliant. And if it is, great. But what happens is the price ends up going through the roof, because all the operators don't want to do the heavy lift of finding their own property. And they all call the same one. The price shoots up through the roof, and now you've overpaid, and you'll overpay for the next 10 years if you do a lease. So it's an unfortunate, statement, but a lot of times what we're left with is, not even looking at what's available, but going off market and having to approach property owners that maybe do have a vacant building and they haven't seen what's going on, and going about it that way. At least at that point, you're not paying as much of a we call it cannabis premium or cannabis tax on real estate. And you can hopefully have a more stable rental rate going forward.
Well, I think real estate property owners have sort of taken it back a little from when they first started. When they first started, I have a property, it's getting $3 a square foot. I can get $25 a square foot if they're a cannabis operator.
Yeah.
And now I think they're starting to realize, well, no, especially in Mass, because now it's more of a prominent business. They're opening up all over the place, and there's successful operations, and you can find space. You don't have to take exactly where they have an approval. There's other places in the state that you can open up. So I think it has let up quite a bit.
And I think it's supply and demand. It's pretty simple. If it's a state or even a city that has a cap on licenses, we always look at things as top line revenue. So like if there's a cap on local licenses or state level licenses, the top line sales should go up for that dispensary. And now you get into, an interesting, highest and next best use conversation. So like, what rent can that operator afford? Our job is obviously to get the operator market rent and not pay anything above and beyond that.
Right.
So what we do a lot of times is we spend time, talking to property owners about kind of talking them off of that concept that they can get 10x what the market is, right? So explaining what the licensing structure looks like, what our projections show, why the rate they're asking for doesn't make any sense. and we'll explain that away. If that's the case. In some cases, the property owners have a lot of leverage, just given the licensing structure in some cases. So,
we were talking earlier about the diversity that New York wants to put into play. Does that give some options, more options for property because of that diversity factor? In other words, well, we can't deny them that property because we need to have a minority, female, or some kind of diversity to own it in that area.
Sure. No, it's a great question. It's another variable, right? There's a lot of moving pieces. At the end of the day, the city is still going to have their ordinance that states where these businesses can locate. So you've got to follow that. And then you get into, okay, well, who are the operators? You have this social equity impact that they're trying to contribute and give back to communities that have been maybe most impacted historically. And so yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to put it is it's another variable, to consider and to put into the formula. But
so
yeah.
In other words, everything is still up in the air. We really don't know exactly how it's going to go.
There are a lot of balls in the air for sure.
Yeah.
I think that hopefully over the next 30 days, I mean, we can get back on if you want at that point. We have a little bit more clarity in terms of how things have shaken up, but they are moving forward. Like I said, the application window opens up August 25th, 2 days from now, and so they're pushing forward, even though we are a little bit in the gray.
So, have you had a lot of? Are there a lot of cannabis companies that are looking to come into that market? Existing companies.
I think everybody wants to be there. All the big boys. I think a lot of our clients that are maybe on the West Coast, they all look at it as a big opportunity. But even with crystal clear rules and regs, it's such a difficult task to pursue a license, pursue an application, the real estate piece, all that. So I think that they've kind of pulled the reins a little bit just to see, and obviously the social equity priority in the beginning has also halted some of their efforts to go in. But I think long term, everybody wants to be there. They think it's going to be a strong market. The legacy market there is obviously extremely strong, which in some cases can translate. There's issues there as well, currently, and probably will be, but in the future. But I think everybody definitely views it as a strong potential market.
Well, I mean, I definitely would understand why. New York City is probably the hub of the United States. So,
Yeah, exactly.
But now you have other markets that you would think would be anxious to also be in this the industry and make it a legalized drug, and that would be like Florida, where
Yep.
I know we're talking about New York, but I'm kind of curious about places like Florida, where why isn't it already? It should have already been legalized there. What do you think that's not?
Man, you're opening up a can of worms here. So, and look, to be completely honest, we haven't done a lot of work in Florida, given the regulatory environment. So they have a medical program right now. I think it's something like, and I'm going to get this wrong, but something around like 30 to 50 licenses, limited license state, fully vertical. So a license gives you the right to basically seed to sale. And you can open up essentially like an unlimited number of locations with that license, retail locations with that license. And again, I might have got that wrong, but it's close to that. So there's a monopoly or something like that with Florida. Right now, the medical license holders have such control over the market. Specifically, the biggest company in cannabis, TrueLeave, based there, has 160 plus locations. You could see why they wouldn't want to open it up to more of a free adult use, open license structure. So I'm not saying that's what's happening, but there's reason to believe that would be the case. And
because
there
I
is
know
stuff happening.
Yeah, and I know people that live there, and they said, "Oh, yeah, no, if you want to buy in a dispensary, you just go to a doctor and tell them you want to buy in a dispensary, and you get a medical card." So
Yeah.
it's not like it's almost like you have to be a member of the adult use community. You join, and now you can go in any of the dispensaries.
Exactly. Yes.
So maybe
Yeah.
that's
So
working out better.
Yep. Yep.
Who knows?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's a strong market. The sales are really really strong. There is a new license round, I think, in the works or coming up. But again, it's the way that I at least that I read it was geared around targeting like the opposite of the New York program, targeting like the top tier operator. So people with lots of money, lots of capital, coming in and trying to open up new, license opportunities. But I think eventually it'll go adult use. Will that change the licensing structure is, I think, the bigger question. If not, there's still real estate opportunities with the theme of this podcast, but it'll be controlled by a small group of really big companies that are based out of Florida.
Well, that's interesting. Before we go, I just want to touch on Connecticut one more time, because a lot of people have asked me questions about Connecticut. I'm not really that familiar with the market, but I know you are, and you probably are. I think you already told me you had purchased space already.
We had identified property.
Oh, yeah.
We were working with a client there. Still are. We're pushing forward, but we're still in that process. So working with some of the license winners to identify property and help them with that conditional use, converting that into a full license. So kind of still in the middle of it. No significant updates, honestly, since the last time we talked, but it is moving forward.
So you got a lot of things going on right now. A lot of different.
We're busy.
Yeah.
We're very busy, but it's exciting.
Yeah, and it is always exciting at the beginning stages as well. Because it's interesting how people are locating space, and
Right.
you see it all the time. But I just all of a sudden I see a dispensary that pops up, and I was, what? All of a sudden it's like right there, and you would think, oh, never, this city or town would never have anything in there, and all of a sudden it's there. And a lot of times it's like people look at the real interesting facts of a dispensary, as far as the security and the look of it, and you just the kind of clientele that go that it's not like you're having a drug dealing going on in an alley,
Right. Right.
or a crack house or something like that.
Which
is what a lot of people think of when they go to these town meetings. But you have some that are a lot more open-minded, and you're kind of surprised by it. So
yeah, there's definitely a stigma. And I think a lot of what we do, honestly, is we have a very strong kind of planner focused approach. So we do a lot of consultations with city. We don't lobby, but like we talk to cities, talk to planners. We show them, renderings or actual pictures of what a dispensary looks like, because honestly, a lot of them don't know. And nowadays, the level of the level of quality in terms of, I'd say, the average dispensary is really strong. I mean, definitely stronger than it was 5 years ago. And my background is in quick service restaurants, so traditional retail. and there's the same conversations going on, the same discussions with architects, designers. It's much more of a traditional retail experience, and then you add on the regulatory requirements for a dispensary in terms of security and making sure that the parking lots are well lit. In some cases, manned security. There's other aspects that bring a level of I guess sophistication to a potential neighborhood, or maybe a piece of real estate that hasn't been used for the last 5 years, and now it's been upgraded, updated, and it's added to the community, and not detracted from it. So we're big proponents of that. We do a lot of conversations around around that topic with planners, property owners, in some cases. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head.
So Berekk, if someone is interested in using zone properties or getting more information about a market like New York, how would they get a hold of you? And what is your website? Do you have a website that they can go to?
Yeah, we do. So our website is Zoned Properties, ZONED, and then propertiesinplural.com. You can go to our About page. Every one of our leadership team's email addresses are on there. You can also submit a contact us form. We're monitoring that closely, and honestly, connect with us on LinkedIn. We're pretty active on LinkedIn, and put out some interesting content there as well. So yeah, happy to chat about any of this with operators, property owners, anybody who's interested.
Well, as always, it was great talking with you, Berekk. We will probably want you to come back with that update you were talking about.
Yeah.
Once, things are
moving
along. Who knows when that will be, but when it does, you can give me a shout, and we'll definitely want to talk about it more.
Yeah,
I want to thank you for coming on. And
no, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it.
And I wish everyone a good day.